I have mixed feelings about Starpoint Gemini Warlords. I went into it really bright-eyed and excited, mostly because it's a game that has everything I could possibly want in a space sim, at least on paper. You command a fleet of ships to do your bidding. You can send them to defend installations or to watch your back while you engage enemies on their own terms. You can build fortifications and negotiate with other factions. Expand, conquer, subjugate. It's pretty much playing a warlord in every proper sense of the word. The issue is that when I had sunk my teeth into it and really given it a go, my expectations didn't really line up with the reality of it. See, it really sucks to say because I in no way whatsoever think that Starpoint Gemini Warlords is a bad game. I don't. It does a lot of things very, very well. For instance, combat is engaging, and there's the right amount of tactical options playing in conjunction with an RPG skill system to make it really fun. A lot of that fun had to do with the fact that there's a fair bit of customization in the game. Now, yes, considering the genre, that customization is a given. I would be way more surprised if it was missing in this game rather than it being included. But the fact that there is that level of customization in the first place that let me really find a playstyle that I like, made it a bit more of a better experience for me. Prepping my ship with a full battery of port and starboard lasers to whittle away enemy shields after I rammed my ship right into their hull was just one tactic that I had at my disposal, but it was one tactic that I really liked to use, and I didn't deviate from that all that much. Now, mind you, I did pick the class that specialized in close quarters combat, and ramming the ship was one of those special abilities locked to my class, so I couldn't really deviate from that if I wanted to, but that doesn't take away just how fun it was to watch my ship turn into a fiery heap of metal and fly right in towards the enemy. BAM! And then let loose a shotgun blast into their hull and watch them blow up in the middle of space. Another thing that I really liked about the game was that it had a healthy amount of base building and unit management. The game's description says it has 4x elements, but I'm not really buying that notion. Sure, there's resource gathering and unit creation and management and the ordering of units around, but it felt less 4x and more of a basic numbers game. Since the game has you play a single unit with no direct control over the other ships aside from assigning them to particular points on the map, they essentially either act as A, sentinels defending whatever points on the map they're assigned to from hopefully weaker enemy fleets, or B, as fire support for whatever mission you yourself decide to undertake. It's an entire system that adds a layer of gameplay that I really do appreciate. Space sims tend to have you acting as an individual. More often than not, you're a single agent, trying to make your way in a galaxy that is largely uncaring, but nonetheless reactive to the things that you do. In Starpoint Gemini Warlords, you're a power player. You control one of the factions vying for power. Instead of making a difference on an individual level and turning the tides, you are one of the tides that are looking to be turned. And I can appreciate the fact that they're trying to make a game that's more engaging than your run-of-the-mill do this fetch quest or participate in this battle and earn your credits. Well, tries to. See, the trouble with the game is that it just doesn't feel as lively as it sets out to feel. It's a fine game, don't get me wrong. I think it's competently handled, and I can tentatively recommend it to a certain group of people. Everything's executed well enough that no individual system or mechanic feels lacking, and it has a fair amount of polish and doesn't really feel buggy or broken. I don't think that the game's advertising misled me, and I don't think that the game is even all that much of a waste of time. The main issue that I had with Starpoint Gemini Warlords was just that it was boring. Now, when I played the game, I happened to play the campaign mode, which I thought would be the most engaging part. I mean, after all, a way to win me over is to present me a good story. But let me know if you've heard this one before. The story begins with the test drive of a brand new prototype super ship that is going to protect your faction from all inevitable danger, until during that test drive a hostile alien force attacks your ship and the commander on the ship has to escape via a life pod. Scanning the life pod of what presumably contains the captain is the character creation process, in which case you get to create your badass space warlord. Then after a tutorial that teaches you how to be a badass space warlord, you're given command of the faction to go out and be a badass space warlord. It's a cliched setup, but honestly, I don't even hate it, even if I did just make fun of it. Cliches are cliches for a reason, they work. But really, the great offender was that, throughout all of that, with the following narrative and the course of events that happened afterwards, nothing gripped me. I did not care about the universe that I found myself in. It failed to make me care about any of the characters I met. It failed to make me care about the factions I ran into. It failed to make me care about who these aliens were, why I was being attacked, or why my presence was even hated in this part of the galaxy in the first place. The overall writing was poor. The missions in the game sent me on generic fetch quests that were destroy this thing, or deliver this object, or scan this thing, repeated ad nauseum. Which I suppose is fine, given that what I'm playing is essentially a space sim. But when you try and sell me a game on RPG elements and 4X elements and make it sound like I'm going to be this badass warlord who makes all these heavy-handed political decisions and goes out to conquer a galaxy, I expect more than a couple of meaningless dialogue choices and skill trees. I mean, like, look at Mount & Blade Warband. Look how great that was, and that's essentially the same game, except this one takes place on a medieval fantasy world. There's a lot of pacing issues too, and it ties in with the fact that the game is very grindy. It has a tendency to lock you behind these arbitrary upgrades that require you to take on side quests in order to earn enough credits to upgrade your ship. It's only after you upgrade your ship that you can actually progress with the story missions. Then and only then are you able to actually move on with the plot. The game puts you in a weird position where you're not only grinding for levels, but you're also grinding for cash. See, the game really wants you to play with those 4X systems it has in play. It wants you to gather resources and then sink them into building buildings, or doing research, or building ships. Which is fine, because that's the theme of the game. I want to be able to explore this. The problem is that it coincides with the objectives that you're given at hand. I would rather use those credits to buy myself the next tier of ships so I can go on with the storyline, but I can't do that because in order to do that I need a certain amount of credits. In order to do that, I needed to do a bunch of side quests. In order to survive those side quests, I need a bunch of ships in my fleet in order to help me survive some of the harder ones to get more credits, but then I have to use those resources to buy new ships to replace the ones that die in the missions that I'm undertaking, and it's just a vicious cycle of going over and over and over again and repeating the same missions over and over again. Look, okay, I get the game wants you to be equipped to handle the harder missions as you go on because, you know, it's one of those games that gets harder the more you play it. But I have to ask, what's the point of being able to put your skill points into lower tier ship specializations if you're just going to restrict them into upgrading in order to further along the story? I can understand why that's a thing in sandbox mode, really, I can, where you're allowed to pilot whatever the hell it is that you want to pilot. But in the campaign, it seems like such a waste of time, and it undermines the whole thing that I was praising earlier about it having this creativity. I think that in the end, this is a game that shines way more as a sandbox experience than as a story-driven one. Now, granted, there are a bunch of game modes that have you start at different points of a sandbox playthrough, and even at the end of the campaign mode, it gives you the option to continue in a free roam setting. At least that way, the game recognizes what its main strengths are. Unfortunately for me, I just lost my patience and don't have too much of a desire to jump back into it. At least not right away. And that really sucks to say because I don't think that this is a bad game. At worst, it's just a game that struggles to hold my interest. I might find it in me to go back in a number of months, maybe the end of the year, or maybe even next year and give it another go. Of course, this time avoiding the campaign mode like the plague and sticking only to the sandbox mode. But right now, I just don't see it happening. And that's really a shame because I think that Starpoint Gemini Warlords has something good going for it on paper. It's got a good framework for what can be a potentially very, very good game. I just think that that potential isn't realized as well as it could be.